Hello SGD, this will be a compilation of videos from 2019 and looking at Hermeticism from very early ages, earliest recorded, through to the Corpus Hermetica, so the Medici, and how this basically gave birth to the Renaissance, so very famous figures connected around this. The crux of it will be, well, who is Hermes? Well, to be blunt, the answer is there is no Hermes. Hermes was a pen name used from the beginning of the Common Era right up until, you could say, maybe the 1700s, and connected to, well, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, but also alchemists and scientists, including famous astronomers as well, and that there has been the concept of Hermes or Thoth or Mercury, a god with many different aspects, but whether again was Thoth, Hermes, Mercury, Nuar and Fuzi in China, that they are gods of knowledge in a way, and that so whether it's especially through the quadrivium, geometry, music, astronomy and arithmetic, and this will of course blend into alchemy, because prior to the Royal Society and official chemistry, in the modern sense that we think of, people have been engaged in chemistry, metallurgy, glass making, dye making. This would be so vital to, let's say, the beginning of the empires, where it's Spanish, English, Dutch, French, that their ability, so pre-industrial age, that they were making cannons, ships, vast global economies connected again to knowledge, to administration. But the modern military-industrial complex has been around for many, many centuries. Again, for the age of empires was the navigation, the chemistry related to forging cannons, the gunpowder, and all those elements connected to it. It's knowledge, it's science. It's not the modern interpretation of how we apply. It's not the modern interpretation of industrialization, where we think either steam powered through to more advanced type of motors, but they were economically, industrially, bureaucratically / administrative, economically, it was very sophisticated, and this is part of a tradition which goes back some time, whether it's Rome, Egypt, Babylon, China or India. They had large civilizations that were trading on massive scales, producing on massive scales, very well organized, very well connected. So the first part will be looking at these, who is Hermes, where was he recorded down, people, Neoplatonists, Hermeticists, what did they say? Well, there is no Hermes. Hermes is a pen name. This carried right up until even the Curies and President Hoover, and this very important mining text, De Re Metallica. But that's the intro to it. An older series, I've also dropped a few other videos that I made independently that will relate back to that connection between ancient times and more recent, up until the very modern era, in regards to chemistry, geometries, etc. Anyways, with that, hope you enjoyed. Again, it's a compilation of an older series with a few add-ons in there, and yeah, have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and I'm taking a bit of a break from what I've been working on, but been diverted into this area, and so I'm going to post a series and try and get through as much as quickly as I can, but basically focused on Hermes Trismegistus and the Corpus Hermeticum, otherwise known as the Hermetica. The famous saying, as above, so below. You can see this image here, Hermes there at the top, the compass and square, and these essentially planetary but also metallurgical symbols, and of course the winged dragon, or what's that, wyvern, eating the snake's tail, and we'll see the same thing here on this famous older image of Hermes Trismegistus, as well as the sun and the moon as constant symbols. But also will be an exploration of Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, also the Illuminati as the original, let's call it. And we'll also be looking at, because these things are all interrelated, Kabbalah, the Rosicrucians, and Freemasons. And so it's broad, but we'll go through this quickly. So we have the what's called the Corpus Hermeticum, or the Hermetica. This is basically a series of 14 books said to be originating from Hermes Trismegistus. It's a tangled web of, well, it's a Gordian knot, if you will, and a tangled web, and we'll have a look more and further. So what's, internet famous in regards to this is the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. So this image goes around. This is not the ancient emerald tablet. This is a reconstruction of it. This is a drawing from the works of Heinrich Kunraf, a very famous, influential hermeticist, alchemist. But even, I'm going to use the word hermeticist very loosely at this moment, because researching this particular one, it was a bit of a letdown from what certain assumptions that I had, because I was focusing on a narrow area. So Heinrich Kunraf, you'll notice as one of the features is this imagery, whether it's Albrecht Dürer and others who have this hand symbol going on in place, but also the compass, the importance of geometricians. This is an image of Heinrich Kunraf in his lab, and what you'll notice is, apart from all the chemical apparatus, so that's really what alchemy is now. This word can be used in a broader sense, and if it works for you, that's great. But when it comes down to these hermeticists, alchemists, the famous ones, they are to the man geometricians and the woman, geometricians, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music theory, essentially the quadrivium, and chemists, and they have the actual chemists' tools there. It's not a ritual, it's actual chemistry, and that's an important feature to keep in mind, because unfortunately on the internets, there are commentators on alchemy who will either diminish or totally ignore the essence of these hermeticists, alchemists, etc. They're all into their we'll go through, I'll show you what I mean as we move through. This is another famous image by Kunraf, including the peacock, the blackbird, also Rebus and Azoth. And you also see the alchemical wedding of the sun and the moon there as well. Sulfur, salt and mercury is another theme as well, with this triangle. Recently did a couple of videos where I touched on that as well, but this is from the Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians, published 1875, and here we can see the tabula smaragdina, or hermetic. Now that translates to the emerald tablet of Hermes, and this is from the original text, but we can get the translations of it. Now, throughout I'll place the link to this particular to the source where you can get it, but also to some English translations of it. But Mercurio, that is Hermes. Mercury in Rome, Hermes in Greek. They are the gods of knowledge, science, geometry, arithmetic, commerce, navigation, and all these other factors. But what you'll find in the Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians, essentially it's a Neoplatonic work, but you'll see how these are essentially Christian Neoplatonists, or Christian Platonists in that sense, where they're incorporating Christianity with these older traditions. So here's a hermetic philosophy. Now what's interesting, if you do open a look through this book, you'll see that there's it's in Germanic script, but if you scan through it, you'll see that there are certain words in let's call them a more modern English font that stand out as well. That's a nice theme, but they don't use it. Do I have an example on this page of that? Probably not. Oh, well, yes. Yeah, there you can see where it's not in the Germanic script, but very often is. And then some words are not. But secret symbols of a Rosicrucians. Here's a translation of the Emerald Tablet. There are varying translations of the Emerald Tablet. That's where this famous "as above, so below" theme emerges. The above and the below, etc. And also the father is the sun, the mother is the moon, the wind carries in it its womb, and its nurse is the earth. We'll come back to this in not too few pages down. So I was given and read this book, excellent book, The Forbidden Universe, Lynn, Picknett and Clive Prince. I'll put in the description as well a link to Lynn Picknett talking at the Origins conference. Very interesting, but also I would, having looked at this again, just offer, they're very determined in their sense, but we'll look further into that. So one of the Origins influences for them was this book by Francis Yates, Giordano, Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition. And these have formed the nub of a certain argument that's been going through, and I think there is a lot of merit to it. Definitely don't take that away. I think it's definitely worth reading, lots of information in there. However, the Corpus Hermeticum, back in 2002, some people went back to the original texts and started translating and found that there is a lot of problems with the Corpus Hermeticum as it's been translated, and most of these texts which were then repeated. Now the original first published 1471, we'll come into those origins, but this is an interesting issue as well, and it's always best whenever you're researching or looking into something to also look at the alternative to, so the beauty of the internet is that I can go into a search engine and it will take me exactly to where I ask it to take me. But then you get into an echo chamber in a sense, and that you really, when you're searching anything, you need to also find that which is opposed to it. And that's the search engine will give you exactly what you want, and if you look for exactly what you want, you won't find what you probably need to know. Things you don't know in research, things that you discover along the way, they're the important things, not what you type in and find. But throughout those books, they repeat the story of Giordano Bruno, and as an hermeticist, and there is good evidence for that, but I think we'll examine this anyway further. So Giordano Bruno famously put on trial for his heresy. Now, most will say Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for his heliocentric heresy. Was it more than that? Well, yes, he was a heretic in many more aspects than that. At that time, there were other people promoting heliocentric views. They were not burned at the stake. There's a lot more to that, but too much for this topic. But Giordano Bruno, the hermeticist, so Mercurius Trismegistus, Mercury Trismegistus, Hermes Trismegistus. Essentially, it's the same character. Mercury in Rome, Hermes in Greek. So he was several significant figures in the church saw Hermeticism as being compatible with a Christian doctrine. These Hermetic books were being moved around at that time. Giordano Bruno seems to have taken this notion even further. However, it's not the heliocentric view he was promoting. It was more the views which were very similar to the Gnostics and the Alumbrades. I'll get into those in the future. These were very dangerous views. So it's not the heliocentric view, but also, for instance, Nicholas Copernicus, he published on the heliocentric model, 1543. Here's one of his diagrams, was showing that view. And in the text he attributes Trismegistus in the text. Now I put that into the Latin translator, Trismegistus to be visible God, the Sophodes, the amber of her eyes fixed upon all things. That's a translation I got from the internet. I don't read Latin, okay, but he was a mathematician, he was an astronomer, he was an economist. This will be the theme that will unite all of these hermeticists. Neoplatonists and Gnostics as well. So I think it's more important to look at them broadly. And so what is a hermeticist? I'm going to use that term loosely, but it's essentially it's Neoplatonism and Gnosticism, which would relate to other certain alternative schools of thinking. Now, they did have philosophical views that cannot be taken away, but all of the hermeticists, as they're called, have different philosophies, different views of the world. Some of them much more secular, some of them very religious, let's call it. What unites all of them is that they're the quadrivium and the trivium, but mathematics, astronomy, music, arithmetic, economics, science, chemistry. This is the one theme that runs throughout and joins all of them. Their philosophies vary, their religions vary, their strength in their religious beliefs vary, but that is what unites all of these particular figures. So now let's look at Siena Cathedral, groundbreaking 1196 and completed in 1348. Now the tiles on the floor here, you'll see there's the tiling. It's the rhombus inside the Vesica Pisces, which would create the flower of life, but also the sun and moon imagery, which is repeated throughout. Later images of just general hermeticism, but the sun and the moon, this is also a very important feature in the alchemical work, such as that by Christian Rosenkreutz, Kunrath, Meyer, Mikkelspacher, etc. Here is an older tabulum smaragdina, or the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, Phoenician, Egyptian, ancient knowledge. Now, notice the sun and the moon and the earth, of course. Now, he references Deuteronomy 33, verses 13, 14, and 16. Now, also Solus, sun, Luna, moon, and Terra, the earth. Now, they're capitalized, but the earth is not capitalized. But essentially they're all the same. Emerald tablet. The sun is its father, the moon is its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse. Sun, earth, moon. Now if you bring up Deuteronomy 33:13, and of Joseph he said, blessed by the Lord be his land with the choicest gifts of heaven above, and of the deep that couches beneath. Now, as above, so below. Beneath is also below, with the choicest fruits of the sun, and the rich yield of its months, and the abundance, best gifts of the earth and its fullness. So that's Deuteronomy 33. As above, so below. We see reference there. Now, other translations of the Bible actually say below, not beneath, but it's the same thing. The sun, months, moon, and the earth. So what you'll find is that a lot of this is based in older religious texts, but this will also extend to Egyptian, like the Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, and etc. Sun, earth, and moon is a constant theme. And on the floor of Siena Cathedral itself, what do we have? We have Hermes, Mercurius, Trismegistus. Hermes the thrice great, or Hermes is equal to Mercury. So we will see this in cathedrals and throughout a lot of Christian traditions, buildings, and books. Okay, so I'm reaching the 15-minute mark. I'll leave it here, but we'll carry on with other parts and we'll look into this further. A lot more to come. Cheers and have a good Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'll put a link to PayPal if you'd like to support the channel, and where we left off was on the floor of Siena Cathedral in Italy, where we have this image of even labelled Hermes, Mercurius, Trismegistus, which is zero to do with Christianity. What is this doing in this particular cathedral, and what does it lead to? Well, here's another image, Mercurius Trismegistus, again Mercurius or Mercury, Roman god of knowledge, science, weights and measures, navigation, etc. And so Hermes, the Greek name, or Mercury in Rome. You notice both of them. Well, he's wearing the traveller's cap, which is off his head at the moment, but we have the winged feet. We also have the caduceus, which is two snakes wound about the rod. The caduceus, so there's a simplified version on the Greek pottery. Caduceus was a magic wand of an olive branch extended to him by Apollo. Wand translates to measuring rod, god of weights and measures. Now in the this image again, we see the snake, the rod with two snakes around there. I'll put a link in the description to a series I did, Magic Wands, Ancient Science, go through the story of how Apollo got his lyre and how Hermes got or Mercury got the caduceus, which relates nicely to this image of Thoth from Temple of Seti I, where we have the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt on top of a snake. Two rods, but each rod has a snake wound around them. And who was Thoth? Well, just like Hermes, just like Mercury, was the god of knowledge, science, linked to, again, geometry, architecture, also the god of weights and measures. So this is here in Sydney at the GPO, General Post Office building, where we see the version. This is, again, you'll find this everywhere, especially connected to banking, the post office or customs house, any building that has to do with trade and, well, commerce. And why does that relate with commerce? Because these were the gods of science, gods of weights and measures, but especially Hermes and Mercury were also the gods of commerce, and also related to the 7 liberal arts, especially arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And you also see how this is so important in, well, many others, but even to, especially the modern Freemasons, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, the quadrivium of the 7 liberal arts. And while we're on the caduceus, I should mention that because in this picture you don't see it, so I'll just bring up this image. So just off to the side there, we see the two Greek, the female sphinxes, and see how their tails are interrelated. Well, that's similar to from Azov of Basil Valentine, but again, the caduceus with these the imagery linked to there. But in regards, these are the gods of commerce, especially. They also have the gods of navigation. What does a merchant have to do? He has to travel, whether by land or by sea. He needs to navigate. He's a traveller, and he has to deal with weights and measures, and he's dealing with, well, metallurgy, for instance, and other trade goods, medicines, which is also within the sphere of Hermes, Mercury, and Thoth, are the gods of botany and medicine as well, or related to that. So here in Sydney at the Arthur Phillip fountain, we have Mercury, we have Vulcan, and Demeter series, but we have, well, Mercury, Hermes, the caduceus, it's a lady, commerce. Now, just a short distance away outside the new building, commerce building, commercial exchange building, they kept the old statue from the old building, the Lady of Commerce, and again, with the caduceus connected there. So gods of commerce, science, well, back to Nicholas Copernicus, not only famous for his astronomy, he was also a mathematician, and he's credited with the early development of what's called Gresham's law, key economic theory in regards to money. And that will bring us nicely to Cosimo de' Medici, banker and politician. Major patron of the arts, architecture. He was vital in the reintroduction of Hermeticism, and again I'm going to use that term loosely, to Western Europe. Now, it's usually stated that Cosimo de' Medici reintroduced the Corpus Hermetica, or the hermeticum, to Western Europe via Byzantium. Now, what is Byzantium? That's the Eastern Roman Empire that survived for 1,000 years after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. I'll show you that in a moment. But he sent out a fellow by the name of Leonardo di Pistoia, also Alberti di Candia. He was commissioned to go search for ancient Greek and Latin texts in what was Byzantium. He found 19 books which became known as the Corpus Hermeticum in Macedonia. He brought them back to Florence, and then Cosimo de' Medici asked Marsilio Ficini to translate them into Latin. So these are some of the oldest, maybe the original, but the oldest versions. I've cut out this piece and highlighted it because we see Cosimo de' Medici patron, the patron of this, and of course it also lists Mercurius Trismegistus, or Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, as we see there. So sometimes Hermes Trismegistus, sometimes Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, sometimes, well, it's the same, leading back to the same fellow, which is Hermes or Mercury, these pagan gods of commerce, navigation, trade, science, and in general terms. And so why is these images? So Constantinople, formerly Byzantium, the city, become known as Constantinople when Constantine the Great renamed it. Well, in the future anyway, we'll also be looking at how Baghdad and the House of Wisdom was very important in preserving these various ancient texts, which are now just bundled together under the name of Hermes, and how the Islamic Spain, especially through the Alhambra, this knowledge was also entered Europe from this particular side. So the focus has usually been on from the east, but via the Alhambra, the Spanish Moors, how this was also a major source of ancient texts back into Europe, which reinvigorated and led to the Renaissance and that explosion of art and science. House of Wisdom, great book, can't highlight it enough. I sort of mentioned it in a recent video on how did Al-Mamun know to enter the pyramid, and suggested that because he was reading these ancient Greco-Roman texts which talk about the Great Pyramid in some detail, he was able to find his way directly in. I'll link that in the description too. But this will be also about the Egyptian origins and influence of this, just this generic stream, like this whole stream, which is Hermeticism. I haven't read this, I really want to, but by Akasha El Daily, and Egyptology, and how the early Islamic era, especially around Baghdad, were very interested in Egyptology and how extended was that. I'll link I think it was a very recent upload in regards to Arab alchemical imagery, how it connects to later European imagery, but also possibly hinting at Egyptian links. And that will be sort of relevant because Athanasius Kirchhoff is a very famous Jesuit scholar, published so many books, including one called the Oedipus Egyptiacus, which is full of Egypt as well, some including the Ouroboros here as well. Famous person worth noting around the 2nd century AD, Clement, the Bishop of Alexandria, witnessed the priests and priestesses of Hermes or Thoth parading with their 42 sacred books. This is a number often it can be found in the Book of the Dead, for instance, in multiple respects. Seems to be connected to Thoth, but we'll come back to Clement and what the Christians, especially the ones not in Rome necessarily, but Constantinople. Now, I'm no fan of anyway, but this sort of the Eastern Empire gets overlooked in that sense. And so the heresy of Giordano Bruno, the hermeticist, as is pointed out by Francis Yates, and also in the Forbidden Universe book. However, I think, again, there's more to look at in regards to this and what is really going on there. So we see really it's Neoplatonic, Gnostic, hermetic influence on Christianity. Now, the focus has been, and I sort of got drawn into it, I must admit, and just by doing this I've realised, we'll see that there's a lot more to it than that, and it's a bit become a trend, a fashion to promote Hermeticism without really including more of these other Neoplatonic Gnostic aspects in regards to this. So Gnosticism, Illuminati, Neoplatonism, and Hermeticism, especially Illuminati, and I'll do more, but so a while back I did some of these videos. I looked to old encyclopedias and dictionaries, and when you look back in not so long ago, the Illuminati was not controversial at all. There are several descriptions of what Illuminati was, and so firstly using this 1828, the name of a sect of heretics who sprung up in Spain about the year 1575, who afterward appeared in France. Their principal doctrine was that by means of sublime prayer they had attained so perfect a state to have no need of ordinances, sacraments, and good works. Basically, they said, we don't need the church. We can do this, on our own. We don't need the Pope. We don't need the bishops. This was very, of course, dangerous at that time. This is Webster's from about 1930, but the Illuminati, okay, they have different descriptions, but certain heretics, the Alumbrades or Alumbrados, who sprang up in Spain, when they appeared in France, their principal doctrine was by mental prayer they had attained again so perfect a state. Now underneath we have the Adam Weishaupt description of the Illuminati and what they come from. A lot to be said about that, but this earlier Illuminati. And Webster's Dictionary, members of a French sect foregoing under the name Illuminés, they were the original Illuminati, or one of the people who had that term attached to them. Now, Odom's Dictionary, 1946, essentially saying the same thing. And they're very similar. I'll go into more in next few episodes. The Gnostics, or the Neoplatonists, and their views of man's relationship to God, essentially. They had was more personal and more direct, as where the church was, to simplify it, but virtually said, you're a bunch of useless sinners. Only through the church and through the sacraments can you enter heaven. These early Illuminati, the Alumbrades and similar groups, including to a certain respect the Cathars, they had very, very different views to what the church was, and these groups were eliminated, suppressed in crusades. That before the Crusaders left for the Holy Land, well, there was other crusades in Europe to eliminate these types of groups. Illuminati, Columbia Encyclopedia. Other groups have called themselves Illuminati, especially a mystical sect in Spain and France. These are the Alumbrades. But the Rosicrucians also called themselves Illuminati. So similar to with the Gnostics, they believe that through a personal relationship to God, but also through study and by understanding nature. If you understand art and philosophy and nature, you don't need the church. You don't need the bishops. You don't need. You can do and achieve these things on your own. And again, this focus on study and knowledge and science, which is very similar to the Adam Weishaupt type of Illuminati, which basically believed in women property rights, universal literacy, and the study of science. Now, it's just usually referred to as a rationalist society, but this was the original, earliest days of Adam Weishaupt. There's a lot to suggest that this original Bavarian Illuminati was actually infiltrated. Not that they were the infiltrators of other groups, but their original open-minded views were actually then infiltrated by other groups, and then eventually led to them being turned into something very different from what some of their earliest social welfare, universal literacy type of principles. Okay, so yeah, the older books are better, and hitting the 15-minute mark. So yeah, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, more to come. Have a good one. Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 3 in a series where I'm looking at Hermes Trismegistus, or Corpus Hermeticum, and everything that surrounds it, and really trying to untie this knot, and doing it as much with available sources. But so Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and also these earlier definitions of the Illuminati, not the Ikeist version, but like the Alumbrades and these other heretical groups before the internet's celebrity Illuminati sort of come around. So it's really big. So the Corpus Hermeticum or Hermetica was, well, reintroduced to Europe, let's call it, by Cosimo de' Medici. Well, he commissioned Leonardo di Pistoia to go and collect ancient books and bring them back to Florence. And the Corpus Hermetica that's most known and talked about now was then translated by Marsilio Ficino, published 1471. In the I'll put that link up again. In the first episode I talked about some criticisms of that translation, and that there was, well, a lot of muddling in there, but also what exactly is the Corpus Hermetica. Now if you look up Emerald Tablet, Hermes Trismegistus, you'll see various I would say more mystical or sensationalized or idealized versions of them. But what we'll just go through and we'll see that there is a link between this general area surrounding Hermes and Mercury, and it can be actually described in the ancient texts. So this is one of the typical illustrations. Now it's Mercurius Trismegistus, Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. Hermes is the Greek god of knowledge, science, weights and measures, commerce. Mercurius, is the Roman equivalent of that. So we saw in the floor of Siena Cathedral where we have Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, and the influence of Neoplatonic, Gnostic, Hermetic and other influences on various heretical sects of Christianity, and how it was suppressed by not just the Roman Church but also the Eastern Church, especially through Byzantium or Constantinople. So Mercurius Trismegistus, or Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, again with the caduceus, the wand, which also translates to measuring rod. These are the gods of knowledge in ancient Greek and ancient Roman. Mercury was the god of knowledge, science, weights and measures, navigation, commerce. And in Greek, Hermes was the god of knowledge, science, botany, medicine, weights and measures, the gods of science. This can be directly connected to the aspects of Thoth in ancient Egypt, and it's often said that Hermes Trismegistus is Thoth. We'll look at that in this next couple of episodes. So a very important person was Saint Clement of Alexandria, Bishop of Alexandria. For instance, in 200 AD, he witnessed priests and priestesses of Hermes, as he called it, or Thoth, parading with their 42 sacred books. That's important because Saint Clement of Alexandria was prominent in the suppression of the Gnostic and Neoplatonic movements, which were centered around Alexandria. So, for instance, the Valentinian communities, or the schools of Valentinus, were described as Gnostic. So I'll get more into what is Gnosticism, Neoplatonic schools, Cathars, and these other heretical groups. But this is a later Gnostics, particular Valentinus, developed a complex doctrine based on all these concepts and held together by the current influence of Neoplatonism. Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, again, that's a very complex thing, hard to describe in short terms. We'll get to that in future episodes. Now I would like to reference a book by a very famous Iamblichus. He was a Neoplatonist mathematician, and he established an academy very close to Antioch. Mathematician, but also was above the Platonic academies, which is different from Neoplatonic, but Plato and Neoplatonism are different, similar but different. But what was written above the Platonic academies was, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter my door." Very similar to the Pythagorean schools and Pythagorean academies. And so geometry, math, music, arithmetic, astronomy are all things linked to Plato, Eudoxus, Democritus, all of these greats, the important figures surrounding there. Now this is chapter 1 of Iamblichus on the mysteries, so mystery schools of the Egyptians, Chaldeans and Assyrians. Chaldeans is, you could just exchange that for Babylonians, or just that twin rivers. You have essentially Babylonians who were the heirs of the Sumerians and these similar cultures. And so chapter 1, Iamblichus on the mysteries, the answer to the preceptor, Porphyry, we'll get to that in a moment. But chapter 1, Hermes, the god who presides over language, was formerly very properly considered as common to all priests. And this passage as well. Hence our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, inscribing all their own writings with the name of Hermes. We'll examine that. This is very, very important text. Now he also references, well, just underneath there, Pythagoras, but also Plato and Eudoxus are very important, because Plato, famous for his philosophy such as in the Republic, and his other writings including surrounding Atlantis and these other allegories, I would call them, but let's put that to the side. Plato was a geometrician as well. Eudoxus was a very famous astronomer. Strabo, in his geographies as he travels through, he says, however, at Heliopolis, the houses of the priests of the schools of Plato and Eudoxus were pointed out to us. Heliopolis, the ancient center of learning, record-keeping in ancient Egypt. The schools of Plato and Eudoxus were pointed out to us. Well, that's the schools of geometry and astronomy. For Eudoxus went up to that place with Plato, and they both passed 13 years with the priests. Since these priests excelled in their knowledge of the heavenly bodies, it goes on to talk, and their philosophy. This was a school, essentially the quadrivium and the trivium, but music, geometry, astronomy, arithmetic, the hard sciences in that sense. And Plato and Eudoxus and these Greek writers, Greco-Roman people, learnt primarily through Heliopolis and then the Library of Alexandria. Platonic solids, that's geometry linked to Plato, how his philosophy was based on observing the natural world. So they would look at the laws of the stars and the heavens, the laws of geometry and math, and formed a philosophy based around there. These are essentially the laws of the divine, however you want to put it, the laws of the creator, these are the laws of God. 1 + 1 = 2. You can't philosophize your way out of it. And so if you build a philosophy on top of that, this is essentially what was happening in this sense with all these various competing philosophies. They had a common origin, that they were students of the sciences and based their ideas on that. I'll put a playlist in the description if you want to make Platonic solids with a bit of paper, compass and straight edge, bit of glue and sticky tape. I'll also link this video, Ancient Knowledge, the transfer of Egypt Chaldea to the Greco-Romans, because the Roman writers, including Herodotus, explicitly say that they learnt through the Egyptians and Chaldeans things like geometry, timekeeping, the sciences in general, and also a playlist to a series on Heliopolis, which relates to Sheset, the goddess of geometry, astronomy, etc. Back to Iamblichus on the mysteries and the important opening, chapter 1, how he opens. Hermes, first word there. Hermes, the god who presides over language. And this is a nice quote from Kurt Gödel. The more I think about language, the more it amazes me that people ever understood each other at all. And you might think about the story of the Tower of Babel in that sense, and how important language is in. So you have the quadrivium, which is the sciences, but in the several liberal arts you also have the trivium, logic, grammar and rhetoric, which are more philosophical, but like rhetoric, how to speak and how to explain your argument. Same essentially with grammar, and logic, how to arrange your arguments. So I focus on the quadrivium, but the trivium are very important because that's about how you transmit your information and how you present your information and make your arguments. Very important in especially the legal term, like debating clubs as well. It's not just about sort of what it's being able to present it and establish those principles. But Hermes, okay. The Egyptian gods of astronomy, writing, math, geometry, botany, medicine, weights and measures, or just science in general. That's Thoth and Sheset. Sheset's been largely forgotten about, but Thoth taught writing to humanity, but Sheset invented writing. Now I should have included Nuar and Fuzi. These Actually, I'll just stop for a moment. Since I'm going to be mentioning the connection, especially with Jesuits in regards to Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, etc., and these links, I want to just bring up, you can just do a search in regards to Figurism. Figurism was an intellectual movement of Jesuit missionaries in China at the end of the 17th, beginning of the 18th century, whose participants viewed the I Ching as a prophetic book containing the mysteries of Christianity and prioritizing working with the Qing Emperor rather than with the literati of China. Now, I'd recommend go have a look at Figurism because they're going to include the connections to Nuwa and Fuzi. So these are some images of Nuwa and Fuzi. They're the same, they're the equivalent of Thoth or Hermes, or Thoth and Chesed, Hermes or Mercury. They're basically the bringers of knowledge. They taught people how to write, how to speak, how to hunt, how to make metal tools, geometry and astronomy. All these music is all linked in China to Nuwa and Fuzi. And you'll notice their sister, brother, wife and husband, they rebirthed humanity after the Great Flood. Very similar to Thoth and Chesed being sister, brother, wife and husband with one another. But you'll see these astronomical symbols all across them. It's important to note the compass and the square. And measurements, they're the gods of weights and measure. That's very important linkage as well. So here's one of the classical alchemical European alchemical symbols with rebus, with the alchemical wedding, the sun and the moon coming together, where the male and the female are fused together in one form, and one holds the compass, one holds the square. The twin snakes, coiling snakes of the caduceus of Hermes or Mercury, being the same imagery, gods of astronomy, knowledge, science. Also the I Ching. So as the story was, Fuzi was beside the river. A turtle come up, and on the shapes of the turtle he come up with the concept of the I Ching. That is also the symbol of, that's a hermetic, that's a symbol of Hermes, is the shell, and that's because Hermes gave to Apollo a tortoise shell lyre. Now, the Chinese version has 7 strings. Most of the ancient Greek versions have 7 strings. And we see that now, compass and square. So again, this esoteric, this very important sun and moon imagery, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, compass and square. And I'll put a link up to a video I'd done on those as well. So these ancient gods, which really span so much of the world, the ancient world, you could find the same in Sumer and Babylon, but gods of astronomy, writing, geometry, arithmetic, botany, medicine, the gods of weights and measures in science in general. And Hermes Trismegistus, often said to be the literal Thoth, or equivalent of that. We saw Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, as in the Siena cathedral. They're the same aspect. So is Hermes Trismegistus the literal Thoth? Well, okay, so in the next episode I'm going to separate. So we also have Imhotep, famous architect, said to be the inventor of pyramids and stoneworking in Egypt. He was later elevated into a god, essentially the equivalent of Thoth in that sense. But he was also the high priest of Heliopolis, which was called the chief of the observers, and Heliopolis was a primary sanctuary of Chesed, the goddess of knowledge and all those, except now the next, because Imhotep was also a famous healer, Thoth, botany, medicine being connected to that, and in the next one we'll be looking at the Corpus Hermetica, which includes several tracks, include Asclepius. Okay, that's Asclepius. I've missed the S there. Anyway, more to come on that. Cheers, have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 4 in the series, looking at Hermes Trismegistus and the Corpus Hermeticum, the origin, and looking back in the ancient texts and trying to untangle this web, and showing how Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, these early groups which were referred to as Illuminati prior to Adam Weishaupt and the famous Bavarian Illuminati, and how this is all generally related to what's also called Hermeticism. I started to mention Ian Blikus on the mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans and Assyrians. And chapter 1, he provides links to Hermes, the god who presides over language, and hence our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, is inscribing all their own writings with the name of Hermes. Very important thing, we'll be getting to that. But Hermes, the god of language, touched on Thoth or Jesuit, gods of knowledge, science, geometry, the quadrivium, botany and medicine. How Hermes is often said to be the literal Thoth, but Hermes Trismegistus, in these hermeticists of this famous era, in just prior to and the beginning of the Renaissance, Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, the gods of knowledge, science, weights and measures. In the past, though, however, Hermes Trismegistus, where is he coming from? Also, I mentioned the Nuar and Fuzi, compass and square, the gods of knowledge, science, astronomy, teaching, language, and how even their imagery connects so closely to the caduceus of Hermes, which is a similar theme, can be seen in the two snakes of the two rods of Thoth. How this compass and square imagery is very important in the esoteric schools, alchemical, hermetic schools, including the important symbol of Freemasonry. And for instance, the famous image of Rebus, the alchemical wedding, compass and square, and astronomical geometric connections as well. This being just, again, the linking theme. Worth looking into Figurism, because I mentioned the Jesuits, and we'll be getting into that more. Imhotep, the famous architect, ancient Egypt, who was then later elevated into god status and the equivalent, or sometimes said to be the literal Thoth. Also, he was a famed healer. Thoth and Sheshet, gods of botany and medicine, science, medical science. And the Corpus Hermeticum, amongst its tracts, include to Asclepius, a letter to Asclepius, and of Asclepius to the king. And now we can see, well, who is Asclepius? Asclepius is the god of healing, the Greek god of healing, the son of Apollo. This links, for instance, the Clash of the Titans movie, but if you look into the story regarding Perseus and slaying of Medusa and how that relates to Asclepius, for instance, Athena told Asclepius that half the blood of Medusa was deadly, the other half gave life and immortality. Asclepius used this blood and started granting immortality, and then, almost Promethean way fell, was doomed from that point. This is a statue of Asclepius on the Sydney University, the medical faculty building, the Stuart Anderson building. Asclepius with a rod and one snake wound about it, the god of healing, medicine, botany. British Medical Association building here in Sydney. You can even see the rod of Asclepius, one snake around the rod. You'll see this connected to pharmacy and etc. Now also on the building, again, the rod of Asclepius. This is a symbol of medicine and healing in various, so these are all from the British Medical Association building. And this is sometimes referred to as the Star of Life, one snake around the rod. Paramedics use this symbol, medicine symbol, the Star of Life, which has the hexagram, star as reflecting the Star of David, and the vesica and flower of life geometry, which again is a consistent theme. We looked at that earlier and saw it in the cathedral in Siena. And also the alternative is the two snakes around the rod, also used by paramedics and doctors, medical science. The rod of Asclepius connected to medicine, the caduceus, the wand or the rod of Hermes, measuring rod, magic wand of oak given to him by Apollo, the father of Asclepius, and how this relates to medical science, gods of knowledge, gods of science. And there's a nice quote by Yaqub ibn Ishaq. He wrote a book on medicine around the time of the House of Wisdom, this important library academy in Baghdad in the early Caliphate. Treatise on the errors of Damascene physicians. Now he writes, the physician must pay attention to the patient's strength, to the matter of the disease and its duration, for if the strength is weak but the disease matter plentiful and the duration long, then the patient should be offered from the very beginning something which sustains the strength while not increasing the disease matter. And here's the kicker, and there is nothing more appropriate for that than the right amount of chicken broth. So chicken soup, this medicine has been around for a while, but essentially it's the science of weights and measures, the science of medicine being related to the quadrivium, to alchemy. Amongst the alchemists were the apothecaries, or the early chemists, who were dealing in various chemistry and herbs, such as the apothecary garden in London, famous site as well, where the apothecary guild and the weights and measures connected to apothecary I've mentioned in other videos. There's all the lovely numbers all connected in there. But back to Iamblichus on the mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans and Assyrians, and how this relates to Neoplatonism. Iamblichus being a very important mathematician, set up an academy, but also a very important Neoplatonist. Now, for instance, on his title page he mentions Porphyry 230, so Iamblichus 245, 325 at this very chunky period. Essentially all the Hermetic books essentially traced back to this time. But who was Porphyry? Again, very important Neoplatonist. He wrote a commentary on Ptolemy's Harmonics, which was about math and music theory. He wrote a commentary on Euclid's Elements. Euclid's Elements is still the Bible of geometry. He was also interested in astrology, therefore requiring a knowledge of astronomy. And he also wrote one of the books, biographies on Pythagoras, which was advocating vegetarianism and other Pythagorean principles, and also a vocal proponent of paganism. The quadrivium: music, arithmetic; Ptolemy's Harmonics, math and music theory; geometry, Euclid's Elements; astronomy, astrology, astronomy. Well, astrology is using astronomy to try and predict the future, define things and stuff. So, but you can't really be an astrologer unless you have a knowledge of astronomy. And also Pythagoras, very important in geometric, the Pythagorean theorem, for instance, and also music theory, Pythagorean hammers, and this concept of music theory relating directly to Ptolemy's work on harmonics. But Porphyry was a very important philosopher. So he wrote the Isagoge, a text on logic and philosophy. Was translated into Arabic and Latin, and it remained a standard text on logic into the Middle Ages. Now this would also relate to the House of Wisdom, and how there in Baghdad, especially under Al-Mamun, the famous tunnel into the Great Pyramid, posted recently a video on that, and how the House of Wisdom was collecting ancient Greek, Roman, Chaldean, Indian, and so a lot of like base 10 maths, algorithm, algebra. A lot of these treatises on medicine were either translated and preserved in Arabic at the House of Wisdom, but were also improved upon. And a lot of knowledge, algorithm, algebra, so much of these things so important to modern times. But so this logic and philosophy. And I used this particular one because we have this symbol here on the front page, and that's the symbol of the Jesuits. Now, St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, and you see that symbol. And also an important, very, very important person is Athanasius Kircher, 1602 to 1680. Wrote many, many books, but he too was a Jesuit. That's why I mentioned Noir and Fusy and Figurism, and how this Jesuit movement in China, they got access to China centuries, like into inland China, not just on the coast at Macau, but they had missions interior of China. Kircher's work full of, so he's a Jesuit, okay, but his works are full of pagan symbolism, and he was into music, geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy. See the 3, 4, 5 triangle, Scala Musica, so his book on music, which includes Doric and Ionian and Phrygian and all these musical nodes. The Caduceus, the constellations, the double-headed eagle, the 2 peacocks there as well, and also the there's a tip of my tongue, the at Ephesus there, Temple of Artemis, okay, Artemis, and notice the hoot hoot, the owl of Bubo related to Athena as well. So he also includes in his many works a heavy dose of alchemy and chemistry embedded in there as well. So the quadrivium and also alchemy medicine. I'll put a link in a description to where I go through the geometry, the math embedded in this imagery. And I'll also put a playlist, the Science of the Symbols playlist, because the first, I suppose, 5 episodes are heavily connected to Athanasius Kirch's work and the related Jesuit scholars there at the time. Another important Jesuit was Giovanni Battista Riccioli, the Almagest Novum. So he was into astronomy and into physics. This is one of his works, and again, you see all the eyes. That's Argo, this ancient Greek legend related to Hera and Zeus and Hermes as well. But also what he was publishing on. So we see Ptolemy laying on the floor. Ptolemy, like his. So they've done away with the Ptolemaic model of geocentrism, and he's replaced it with a dual model where it's heliogeocentrism, where some of the planets go around the sun, but some of them orbit the Earth. And this was probably a compromise because, well, it was a dangerous time to be into these things. Now, even at the top here, where we see the tetragrammaton, but also numerous, mensura, and pondus. So numbers, measures, and weight. Weights and measures, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy. This is what links all of these people in the Renaissance and back to original times. There's many divergent philosophy ideas, but this is what links them all. Now, in regards to the Illuminati, Illuminatus, Illuminato, we have the Alambrades or Alambrados, members of a French sect which arose 1621. They were very Gnostic in their sense, and it's suspected that Loyola was an Alumbrad before he became a Jesuit, or actually probably kept that in secret, and we can see these same Gnostic symbols, hermetic symbols, in these other very important Jesuits, as we saw Kircher and stuff. But this is before Bavarian Illuminati. These were the earlier Illuminati, and their similarities to the Neoplatonic schools is very strong. Which brings us back to Porphyry, Neoplatonist, geometrician, music theory, math, astronomy, Pythagorean philosophies as well, and this book, the Isagoge. Now we also have Porphyrian trees, which are called also logic trees or issue trees. This is a Porphyrian tree in a church somewhere, I forget which one, but this is substance. So how do we classify things? And so, for instance, now in biology, is it warm-blooded or is it cold-blooded? If it's not warm-blooded, it cannot be a mammal. Then you can work. Does it have 6 legs? Does it have 8 legs? And this system of division and classification is still very important. Now, for instance, Plato's logic as opposed to Neoplatonic. So Plato famously said, man is a featherless biped. So man is something that walks on 2 legs and is featherless. Diogenes plucked a chicken, dropped it in front of everyone and said, behold, Plato's man. So this is the Greek schools and developments and competitions, but I really like Diogenes, behold a man, and Plato. But amongst many other quotes, my favourite is when Alexander come to visit Diogenes. Diogenes famously said, get out of my son, because he was casting a shadow. And then Alexander the Great said, if I were not Alexander the Great, I would wish to be Diogenes. To which Diogenes replied, if I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes. He's one of these early meme masters as well. This is a Porphyrian tree by Athanasius Kircher. We see the Jesuit academies. Prior to the Dewey Decimal System, this was how they arranged their libraries as well. So now Raymond Lull, I'll get into, okay, so getting the 15-minute mark, but we'll be following on with this in the next episode and all these connections. Cheers, SGD. Have a good one. Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. Part 5 of this series, looking at Hermes Trismegistus, the origins, linking them to ancient texts and seeing just where all this comes from. Started to talk about Iamblichus on the mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans and Assyrians, published back in the 3rd century or very early 4th century AD, and how important this is, because this is one of the earliest books that even begins Hermes, the god who presides over language, and if hence our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, inscribing all their writings with the name Hermes. I started last episode looking into, because on the front page of Iamblichus we have Porphyry relating to the quadrivium, music, maths, geometry, astronomy, linking to Pythagorean schools and the philosophies related therein, and the Neoplatonic influence, so what's now generally referred to as Hermeticism. So whether it's Rosicrucians, Freemasons, all these type of groups, they have very, very strong connections to Neoplatonism, and for instance, but the essence of this and the 7 liberal arts, especially the trivium for the moment, logic, grammar and rhetoric, and so this, the Isagoge by Porphyry was a standard text on logic, philosophy through the Arabic and into Latin, and remains so into the Middle Ages, and even later we even see, for instance, this copy from the time of the Jesuits. I mentioned, okay, Porphyrian trees, how they relate to, well, logic trees, issue trees, way of categorizing things, and how this particular invention supplanted earlier schools of logic. Okay, we looked at Diogenes in the last part. Mentioned, for instance, as a system of before the Dewey Decimal System, the Jesuits were using it in their catalogue. This is an illustration by Athanasius Kircher. Universe, cognition, so cognition, thinking, and typists, how to set things and arrange categories and, well, logic. And I ended with Raymond Lull. This is a 16th century illustration of Raymond Lull, or Raymond Lully as he's sometimes called. Very important figure, and for instance he influenced Giordano Bruno. We've started in the very earliest part of the series talking about Giordano Bruno. He was, but amongst being a philosopher, diplomat, all these other things, he was a mathematician. Again, this is what links all of these famous characters, is especially the quadrivium, music, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, but also chemistry / alchemy and logic, philosophy, the 7 liberal arts. Now, Raymond Lull, election and computation theory, the early versions attributed to him, and he was a big influence on Gottfried Leibniz. Sorry, missed typo. Now, Leibniz is often referred to as a Christian Platonist, not Neoplatonist, but a Platonist, and a Christian one at that. But this importance of the same, all of these figures will are linked. So they have varying philosophies, orbiting the same general area, but varying, but they all share this. Now, in, for instance, the old Illuminati descriptions, which include the Alumbrados, the Rosicrucians being the familists and perfectibilists, and these other groups, or the quietists, you can look them up. But the illuminated doctor, Raymond Lull, Doctor Illuminatus. Seen the Da Vinci Code, Illuminatus, yes, and being decried. Another important work of Porphyry was Adversus Christianos, or Against the Christians. This was banned by the Emperor Constantine twice. The Emperor Theodosius II ordered all copies to be burned, so no texts original survive. However, many Christian writers challenged his arguments at the time, and so we have some idea of what he was placing in there. But there were Christian Neoplatonists and there were anti-Christian Neoplatonists. During the School of Wisdom, the early caliphates, when we had that library at the Baghdad and the academies there, we saw many different philosophies. However, what unites them all is, again, the music, math, geometry, astronomy, and chemistry. Just as a side note worth mentioning, so the Roman Empire was 285 was split up into the Western and the Eastern Empire. The city of Byzantium later was changed to Constantinople after Constantine the Great who converted the Roman Empire to Christianity. He was not centered in Rome, he was centered in the Eastern or Byzantium, as become called Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire had collapsed by 476. The Eastern Empire had swallowed up most of it, but we can see large sections, and over time the Byzantine Empire shrunk till it collapsed in 1453 with the fall of Constantinople. However, by that time, on the western side, the Holy Roman Empire had come back together, and it continued to 1806. So most times you hear, well, the Roman Empire collapsed around about 400 AD. Well, no, actually, in some form or another, carried on for quite some time afterward. Now, that's important because you see the Holy Roman Empire. Now, in alchemical symbolism, you see the double-headed eagle. The Holy Roman Empire is the same double-headed eagle emblem, being very important to the Byzantine flag empire. I'll put a link in the description in regards to that in Omphalos, Umbilicus, Navel, or Ben stones, and how this double-headed eagle, multiple meanings with all these things, but it represents the center of the world. That is, for instance, the Omphalos stone of Zeus and the Omphalos stone at the temple of Apollo at Delphi, the center of the world where the oracle was situated. This is also relates, I mentioned earlier, Saint Clement of Alexandria, who witnessed the priestesses of Hermes, as he called them, parading with their 42 sacred books. But also, it was actually from Constantinople, the Eastern Church, not the Western Church, because Rome was declining in power, but it was Constantine, Theodosius, who were ones who, not exclusively, definitely not, because it was happening in the West, but in the East, they were the ones who were really clamping down on the Gnostics and the Neoplatonic schools and these heretical schools, the book burning, the suppressions. Council of Nicaea in the 4th century was where the Bible, the New Testament, was put together shortly after Constantine's conversion. And Ptolemy II, again, a pagan, he, at the Library of Alexandria, had the Old Testament put together. So the Old and New Testament of the Bible were put together by pagans, essentially. And they removed a lot of books, the apocryphal books as they're called, and this is where a lot of the issues are. So it has to do with the suppression of the Gnostic Christians and the Neoplatonists as well. But again, which brings us back to Porphyry and the book against Christians, but he was also important again in logic, music, geometry, astronomy, etc. Porphyry he compiled and edited the Enneads of Plotinus. Plotinus is one of the founders of Neoplatonism. Now, the term Neoplatonism is relatively recent. It's not like an ancient term, but it's separate from the Platonic schools. But Plotinus, hugely influential in this area, and the Neoplatonist thinking, as it's now called, Hermeticist Gnostics, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, Cathars, Manichaeans, all of these heretical groups, and those opposed by the major churches in the East and the West. Very, very important figure. So he was also come up with substance theory, which is essentially that the substance, which is made of many parts, is different to its smaller pieces. So it's something along the lines of the sum of a whole is greater. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But this has philosophical aspects in regards to it. A very complicated topic, but Plotinus, a Latin translation, but the Enneads, so which I could get a higher resolution, but we see the Enneads, and the translator was Marsilio Ficini, we see here. That's important because he was the translator who Cosimo de' Medici asked to translate the Corpus Hermetica as it arrived into Florence, and this brings up the issue of translations and the issues. The translations have been looked at, and so through the Rosicrucians, etc., they've been reprinting it, but looking back at the original Ficini translation, there are issues in regards to that. But what is Neoplatonism? This is reams have been written about it. You can I'd advise to search for yourself in regards to that, but Plotinus is the concept of the one. Now, Neoplatonists especially, like one was of high value, but there's the one containing no division, multiplicity, sorry, again a typo, or distinction. Well, this is one of the things that makes one very special in maths. 1 divided by 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. If I add 1 plus 1, I get 2, it gets bigger. But I can't multiply it, I can't divide it. This is the idea of the rules of math and geometry being such an important influence to these older schools of philosophy. This is just a screenshot from the Wikipedia page on Plotinus, which he talks about the one and concepts such as logos, duality, gnosis or knowledge, and these aspects. Again, it's a very, very long and heavy topic, and it would take a whole series to go into it as well. But if you look into either the Enneads or just Plotinus and various schools, there are, again, many, many pages on that. But gnosis, knowledge, logos, reason, divine intellect, duality, basically the concept that unlike the church, which basically said you're a sinner, and only through the church, only through the sacraments, only through our authority can you enter heaven or achieve or come closer to God. As where the Neoplatonists had even pre-church, but where it's Gnostics, Hermeticists, Cathars, Alumbrades, the early Illuminatists, all these heretical organizations, group thinking, had these similar concepts to in varying, sorry again a typo, degrees or forms, another typo. But all the heretical groups were basically said, we don't need the church for the sacraments, we don't need the Pope, we don't need the churches to get to a higher position. And this is very Neoplatonic, and this is also very similar to Zen, Buddhism, this type of thing as well. And so again, I would advise to, if you want to get more into that, it's really, I can't cover it in any sort of short form video, and there's many arguments this way or that way, but this is the essence of it, the one. Which brings us back to Iamblichus on the mysteries, and hence our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, inscribing all their own writings with the name of Hermes. Okay, so now in this next part we'll be looking at exactly who is Hermes, and to be showing, well, there is no Hermes. We are all Hermes. There are many Hermes, and I'll do that in the next part, and we'll be looking at other texts. Essentially, Hermes is a pen name or a nom de plume used by many writers, and we'll see that in the next part. I don't have enough time to finish it in these 15 minutes. SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, thanks for watching. I'll have some more links in the description and the earlier series of this video in the description. I hope you enjoyed and have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 6 in this series, looking at the Corpus Hermeticum or the Hermetica, which includes the Emerald Tablet, the letters of Asclepius. But so the question is, who is Hermes Trismegistus? Quite a bit written about that, presented about that, but amongst those presentations you'll find that there is some very important omissions in regards to that, and I would say a lot more wishful thinking than actual anything on a strong basis. So who is Hermes? There is no Hermes, and I'll explain this very clearly now. So Iamblichus on the mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, Assyrians, 3rd century AD, when just about as when all the oldest texts which the Corpus Hermetica were based on emerge around this period. And in his first page, Hermes, the god who presides over language, properly considered as common to all priests, the true science concerning the gods. But the kicker is, hence our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, inscribing all their writings with the name Hermes. And I'm going to be repeating and mentioning that over and over because it's very, very important. So we see this very early work, which is based on Iamblichus, mathematician, Neoplatonist, which is really where all this Hermeticism emerges from. The Gnostics, Neoplatonists, leading to Hermeticism, Rosicrucians, and these types of groups, but this feature. So Hermes is a pen name, a nom de plume, as it's in the Francais, inscribing all their writings with the name of Hermes. So in the earlier parts I mentioned Nicholas Copernicus. He's on the revolution of the heavenly spheres, presenting the geocentric model. He attributes Hermes as a source of his wisdom, inscribing our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, inscribing all their writings with the name of Hermes. Okay, so Copernicus, mathematician, astronomer, economist, the quadrivium, geometry, music, arithmetic, astronomy, and the 7 liberal arts and the early sciences of the old school of teaching in that sense. He attributes Hermes. Now I'll link the House of Wisdom by Jim Al-Khalili talks about the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. So in the early caliphates they were collecting Indian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, any old texts they could get their hands on, and they were translating them, and they were also improving on them. And Copernicus gives credit to Hermes. However, what he doesn't give credit to is Althussi, an astronomer, mathematician, geometrician, and physicist of the period of that House of Wisdom. So there we see Copernicus's diagram and of the couple. That's a very important geometric discovery, and it also relates to the orbits of the planets. Now, there's Copernicus' drawing, and there's Althussi's drawing. It's not it's famous comparison of the Althussi diagrams, of the Althussi couple diagrams, Althussi 1261, and that of Copernicus 1543. Not is it the similarity of the shapes is remarkable, but as the identity of the letters labeling the points. Althussi Aleph, that's where Copernicus uses A. B, G, D, so on. So it's an exact copy. Althussi was not Hermes, but so it's not really in Copernicus. He doesn't really he credits Hermes. He doesn't credit Althussi. Hermes is a pen name, generic name used for all these people, these scholars. The quadrivium, the trivium, philosophy back in the day was a more broad term for science as well. So all these scientists, chemists as well, all credit Hermes. Now you can see Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes, geometry, astronomy, weights and measures, physics. Hermes Trismegistus is a pen name. This is De Re Metallica by George Agricole, very, very important book. Presented some videos on this before, but it's a textbook on firstly how to find minerals and metals, how to mine them, worker safety. It's a textbook on mining, also on refining metals as well. Very, very important text of this Hermetic period, and so important to Hermeticism. It was the English translation was by Herbert Hoover, who went on to become president. There he is meeting Madame Curie, Mary Curie, famous for her work on radium and radioactive materials. Now, if you want to go a bit of down a rabbit hole, George Agricole, look up the original meaning of his name, the original family name of the Rothschilds prior to Bauer. Agricole Mining Companies, the Credit Agricole Company, the Curies and their connections to, and how the Rothschilds supported this work. Herbert Hoover and Fort Knox. There's a nice little rabbit trail if you want to go down that way, linking these things. Now that's important because metallurgy, alchemy, is super important in coin making and banking. And there's a famous coin maker's house in Frankfurt. I mentioned earlier that Cosimo de' Medici, banker and politician, was the one who funded the search for these older texts and paid for the translations. Copernicus, along with astronomy, also developed Gresham's law, early economic theory on money. Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus was the god of knowledge, science, weights and measures, commerce, and also travelers or navigators. This is a very important feature as well, because in the opening notes by Herbert Hoover in regards to De Re Metallica, he references a letter from Elector Augustus to Agricola in 1555, and it reads, "It is our gracious command that you should get the book translated when you have the opportunity into German, and not let it be copied more than once or be printed, but keep it by you and send us a copy. If you should need a writer for this purpose, we will provide one. Keep it secret, keep it safe." He also mentions that one of the big problems in this early translation, this is Hoover writing, it is a wretched work by one who knew nothing of the science and who more especially had no appreciation of the peculiar Latin terms used by Agricola, most of which are rendered literally. Bad translation. The guy didn't understand the science, and this is an issue with Hermetica, especially on the internet in the moment. They've turned it into I've got to say, a new age thing. And they're really missing the point of what these texts are, and they're essentially related to the quadrivium. Keep it secret, keep it safe. I'll link a video in the description, part 33 I did on the science of the symbols. Alchemy, it's a deadly serious business. Knowledge is power, power is money, trade secrets, military secrets. So back in the time of Agricola, Basil Valentine and all these famous hermeticists, alchemists of the time, navigation, military secrets, banking secrets, medicinal secrets, armor, gunpowder. These are all at the heart of alchemy, and this is why it was kept as a secret amongst those people, and why some translations were probably done intentionally, like the earliest street map of Venice was intentionally done wrong, so that the armory, the most important part of Venice where the ships were being made, was mislabeled on the map. This is it. And Ernest Rutherford, father of nuclear physics. So alchemy, chemistry is just as vital now as it was back then. Now we have atomic weapons, but gunpowder cannons, navigation, that type of knowledge would have been the equivalent of seafloor navigation for submarines. The big weaponry systems, the military industrial complex connected to the banking complex is the same issues been going on. Now in the notes, okay, I can skip that one for the moment. So this is actually what Agricola wrote, and now seeing that there are so few who have written on the subject of metals, it appears to me all the more wonderful that so many alchemists have arisen who would compound metals artificially and would change one from another. He goes then on to link to reference, and I omit myself a few, but there are Hermes, Zosimus, Agathodamon, Geber, Merlin, Raymond Lully, Cleopatra the alchemist, and Maria the Jewess. I'll get more into these, but hence our ancestors dedicated the inventions of their wisdom to this deity, inscribing all their writings with the name of Hermes. It's a pen name, and these many of these others are also suspected pen names, where alchemists, scientists of the time in general would simply write this name to protect their identity, but also to give some, make it more powerful, because if it's from Hermes, it would have that extra little oomph to it all. Secret symbols of the Rosicrucians, which includes the emerald tablet, which is from the Corpus Hermetica. Hermes, we inscribing all their writings with the name of Hermes. Hermetic philosophy, same thing. Also in the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians, it mentions Basil Valentine, very important alchemist, as of a philosopher's stone. The 12 keys of Basil Valentine, very important works. Well, Basil Valentine, because of the number, the spread of time, and also the variety of the writing forms, highly suspected that Basil Valentine, if he was an original person, but the majority of his works were by other people using Basil Valentine as their pen name. Hermetic philosophy, and this is Siena Cathedral, Hermes Trismegistus. Pen names. So a famous scene from Spartacus, which one of you is Hermes Mercurius? Trismegistus, I am. No, I am Hermes. No, I am Hermes. No, I am Hermes. We are all Hermes. And this is, so whether it's Basil Valentine, Geber, Hermes Mercurius, Trismegistus and others, they are not one, they are many. Now also in De Re Metallica by Agricole, even see Froben edition has a hermetic caduceus there right on top, even with the bird wings. It's just swapped it for a bird. He mentions all these other alchemists, all inscribing their writings with the name of Hermes. He includes Geber, mentioned in a recent video as well, and I did back in a series before, Geber, where we get the term gibberish from, because it's like, well, I can't understand this. Well, because it was scientific, but it was also written in a poetic form. We didn't have all the notations for maths and chemistry, but well, Geber was more almost certainly a pen name for many people. No, I am Geber. No, I am Geber. So all these writings get attributed to a certain person. Now, also in the notes on De Re Metallica, he specifies Hermes Trismegistus was a legendary Egyptian personage supposed to have flourished before 1500 BC, and by some considered to be a corruption of the god Thoth, very much in a vein of way Imhotep was promoted. He is supposed to have written a number of works, but those extant or surviving have been demonstrated not to date prior to the 2nd century. He is referred to by the later Greek alchemists and was believed to have possessed the secret of transmutation, which is connected to the Philosopher's Stone. And he also mentions Osphanes, Zoroaster, but these are all essentially pen names. Very shadowy figure, Osphanes. Also Zoroaster. Pliny mentions a magician of this name who accompanied Xerxes' army. Later this was a favourite pseudonym for ancient magicians. Agathidamon, still another very shadowy figure. Pen names, these are pseudonyms that were written and used for different figures. Now, all of these are essentially pen names, but they're very important figures because for instance, after the Greeks, and when we had the House of Wisdom and the alchemists such as Geber, mathematicians, astronomers of that period who were collecting, translating works and then improving on them, and from there they were transmitted and came back into Europe. And Maria the Jewess for the Maria's bath, Cleopatra famous for distillation, Zoroaster famous for the pelican flask. So who is Hermes? There is no Hermes. We are all Hermes, and on a side note, when they started thinking for us, it became their world. That's, I think, noteworthy. But so, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, just there is no Hermes. The Corpus Hermetica suffers many issues, including an original mistranslation, which people who have gone back to the original Greek have noted, just like with Hoover's comments on the translation of De Re Metallica into German. People who were not seeing it as the scientific text it was turned it into a philosophical one. But cheers, have a good one. Hello, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 7 in this series where I've been looking at Hermes Trismegistus and everything around this sphere, the Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum. And where I left off from the last episode was again going back to the older texts where Iamblichus, mathematician, Neoplatonist, very important figure, so influential to all of the later Hermetic artworks, the philosophy and of course the quadrivium, specified that the Hermes being a pen name for everything to be surrounded with this particular field. This is a page from De Re Metallica, this 16th century text on mining technology, refining metals, just that whole, again, general era. And he too credits Hermes in his opening passages. He also mentions a few others. We'll look at those now. Osphanes, Zoroaster, not Agathidamon, Geber and Valentine, which is not mentioned in here, but there are definite connections. And for instance, Cleopatra, the alchemist, and Maria the Jewess, 2 of the 4 female alchemist said to have uncovered the secret of a philosopher's stone. So the Froben copy, we see the caduceus on top, the caduceus of Hermes, Mercury, gods of knowledge, science, gods of magic, gods of knowledge, weights and measures, and just some of the images from there where we see this how to refine metals. It's also got the machinery of mining and a lot of aspects in there in De Re Metallica. So, okay, Hermes, it's credited in there. Now we'll look at the others. And also this is an interest. All these alchemists employ obscure language. I'm going to do in the final couple episodes, especially looking at medicine and the origins pre-Greek of these texts, and especially how they emerged through Babylon, and the issue of translation, which was an ancient issue of translation. That this obscure language is not a problem just now, but was a serious enough problem back in the Greek times that the priests had to put out public declarations explaining the language, so to stop people basically butchering animals that had nothing to do with the language being employed in those medicinal remedies. So the Corpus Hermeticum, back in 2002, they re-examined the original text, compared them to the translations by Ficino, and his translations then being repeated up through to the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians, and leading to certain issues. In the opening notes by Hoover, who translated it into English, the German translation, as he states, is it is a wretched work by one who knew nothing of the science, and more especially had no appreciation of the peculiar Latin terms coined by Agricola, most of which he rendered literally. So again, the issue of translation, and when certain words come up, and this is a serious issue, I would say. Now, I can't answer all the questions, there's a lot more to this, but just trying to stay with what we can sort of examine. Basilica Chemica by Oswald Kroll, or Oswald Crollius. See the plumb line and the square, which is again this very, very important image in Freemasonry, and even earlier, such as Kircher. It's a very important standard. It's also referenced quite a bit in the Bible. Just let me pause a moment. For instance, the frontispiece we see here, and again, just to zoom in on it, you see the caduceus of Hermes, the symbol of Hermes, Mercury, Hermes, Mercurius, Trismegistus, gods of knowledge, commerce, science, all that, and magic. But like we'll look at magic in a moment. But there's some interesting figures here. I'll just move on now. For instance, Agricola mentions again Hermes, and so we see on the top left of Oswald Kroll, Hermes Trismegistus of Egypt, and you notice the phoenix as well in there. Top right we have Geber of the Arabs, and notice the pelican with feeding its young from its breast by bleeding. Geber, of course, is mentioned here. So Geber and Hermes Trismegistus, we saw earlier episodes, pen names, because for instance, especially Geber, which from 9th century, but the number, same with Basil Valentine and a few others, the number of works that they did, the difference in languages and style in the works, again, highly almost certain that this was a pen name employed by many. He also referenced Raymond Lullius, or Raymond Lull. See, Raymond Lully. We'll look at this image as well, but also the Star of David hexagram above there. Also this, notice the three flowers, I'll bring that up again as well. Raymond Lull, mentioned him earlier, he was a Doctor Illuminatus. Raymond Lully, Doctor Illuminati, a mathematician, important in election and computation theory, which so influenced to Gottfried Leibniz and binary code, and binary code computing. He also referenced Cleopatra. Now, Cleopatra the alchemist, not the more famous Cleopatra. This is one of her works, Chrysiopeia, on the Philosopher's Stone. But you might notice as well these instruments, which are distillation tools, working like an alembic, and also the uribus. Now, for both the Renaissance, medieval alchemists of Europe, but also prior to them, the Arabian alchemists, they reference and hold Cleopatra of Egypt in high regard, one of the women said to have uncovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, but also said to be the inventor of the alembic or distillation. So if you've ever had a scotch or whatever, just give a shout out to Cleopatra the alchemist and her chemical process, which is still used in labs today. If we zoom in on her uribus, Ouroboros, it translates to all is one, which is again very important in the Neoplatonic and these philosophical schools as well. Some other, again, we see these alchemical tools and the Ouroboros as well. And again, Arab alchemy prior to European. This is by Athanasius Kircher. I mentioned earlier the Phoenix. We also have the Ouroboros. Now we also have the North Star and Leo, which but again, this is from Kircher's work, and this is from Oedipus Egyptiacus. Again, these symbols. Notice also Auster or south, and Boreas or north is upside down. East and west is swapped as well. This is a common thing that happens with this sun and moon themes. But from Kircher's work, okay, pay attention. They're on top of the crocodile, on top of the lizard. Now, if you zoom in, sun and moon, music and distillation tools, geometry, weights and measures. So again, these repeated symbols across all these different time periods and cultures. He also mentions Cleopatra and Maria the Jewess, and she is important because she is said to be the inventor of the Jews, the Maria's bath or Bain Marie, also said to have uncovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. And again, medieval, Renaissance, Arab alchemists referencing the Maria's bath and holding Maria the Jewess in high regard, along with distillation. So the Soxhlet extractor emerges from this time. So all these chemical tools that you would see in a modern lab have their origins way back and connected to these famous alchemists. Of course, Hermes Trismegistus inscribing all their writings with this name. Well, these other people are also the equivalent of Hermes, so Geber, etc., where it's a pseudonym, which is employed by other people. This is from the notes written book by Hoover in his translation of De Re Metallica, and again Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary supposed to have flourished, but there is no surviving works prior to the 2nd century, not so long after Iamblichus wrote that all the writings with the name of Hermes. He was right up against that back at that time. He also mentions Osphanes, another very shadowy personage considered by some alchemists to have been an Egyptian prior to Hermes, and by others to have been a teacher of Zoroaster. So these ancient alchemists, the Greek ones, have different ideas on, and again employing pen names. Pliny mentions a magician of this name, Zoroaster, who accompanied Xerxes' army. Later, many others by this name. Most probable explanation is that this was a favourite pseudonym by ancient magicians. Xerxes' army, but we have many people connected to Osphanes, Zoroaster, Hermes, Thoth, and Agaphodaemon as well would be compared, and Zosimus as well. But did I show? Now, for instance, he mentions Zosimus, and if we go back, this is the alembic of Zosimus. So again, he's mentioning multiple, these characters overlapping from one another. Hermes, okay, Zoroaster. It's now a favourite pseudonym for ancient magicians. Well, any sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic. Okay, if I go for a moment This is that Kroll page, and he references Roger Bacon, who, and again I mentioned the crocodile or the lizard. Roger Bacon wrote down the how to make gunpowder. First people to see gunpowder, that would appear like magic. Romanus, we see the Ouroboros. We mentioned the phoenix, which is connected to Hermes in Kroll's work. And I'll come back to that. The pelican feeding its young. Paracelsus, very important alchemist, especially in regards to medicine, but the sun and the moon imagery. But here we have Raymond Lull. Now notice, well, just like we saw earlier, he's holding the three flowers. We have the Star of David, so the famous images of Basil Valentine. It's almost identical. And identical. Now it's maybe hard to make out here. There we have what we see there, and what we see in the background of this image is what we see here. The fox eating the cockerel, which relates to dragon's blood, and I'll put a link to some lab where he uses the language in the imagery and the known symbols, chemical symbols of the alchemist, recreates it and makes fluoroidal gold. So there we see the cockerel being eaten by the fox. So we see again these, some attributed to Raymond Lull, others to Basil Valentine. If we go on to Zoroaster, School of Athens, very important artwork with many famous people, Diogenes, Socrates, Hypatia, Euclid, Pythagoras, but it includes Zoroaster. And the thing that Zoroaster is famous for, that Rose Cross, Rosicrucians, that's the 18th degree Scottish Rite Freemasonry. You'll see the same symbol in churches. The breast, the pelican, feeding its young. But the pelican flask, double distillation, again credited to Zoroaster in Arab alchemists, and then again later European alchemy, distillation, once more this important alchemical process. There's an older one, and there's what it would look like in a modern lab. In Kroll's work, he shows Geber with the Arabs. Well, again, Geber, the Arabian alchemist, and there we see the pelican connection again. But also Zoroastrianism, Eastern mystical schools, religions, and duality. So Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, is versus the Angra Mainyu, of a lying mind. But the God and the devil have to be equal because they could not exist. This is sort of one of the dualistic themes, a bit deeper than that. But this was also the Cathars, the heretics in Europe who were expunged in a crusade. They were dualists and shared a lot with Neoplatonists, so Gnostics, Neoplatonists, Hermeticists. This is Clavis Ardis, 1600s, the three flowers, Zoroaster on top of the crocodile. Zoroaster, Clavis Ardis, and this is from Clavis Ardis, where we see a close-up the wyvern eating the snake. Hermes is again image, compass and square, wyvern eating the snake. School of Athens, and I'll do this in the next one, but Plotinus, Aristotle, Plato, Diogenes, Ptolemy, Euclid, Pythagoras, etc., etc. 7 liberal arts. Cheers. Hello, I'll end it here because the compilation, the second half, will go into a different direction, but I'll set the tone for those with these just again to say, who is Hermes? Hermes is a nom de plume, or a pen name, who's been used for centuries, connected to alchemy, science, geometry, sort of the gods of knowledge, gods of science, gods of weights and measure. Now even you could look into sort of the connections with Enoch in regards to weights and measures, and there is also an overlay there, but yeah, since it would be quite long, and the next few pieces do divert a little bit from here. So anyway, just setting the stage, and in the next couple uploads, even though they are connected, they're different enough, really they should be on their own, and they do deviate a little bit from the thrust of what these parts in regards to the Pimander or the Corpus Hermetica, again going back to the Neoplatonists, and early alchemists such as Cleopatra the Alchemist. So anyway, hope you enjoyed. There'll be a few. I'll follow up again either tonight or tomorrow in regards to the next parts. But there will be a follow-on because I'm looking at Basil Valentine and the Arab alchemists such as Geber, the symbolism from there, which again lead back to the Gnostics, the schools of Thoth back in Alexandria, the early Christian years, and what happened with those. And yeah, okay, so that will be following up next. Hope you enjoyed and have a good one.